Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Tuesday, March 18th, 2025, episode 338, and we're going to talk about Arlington National Cemetery and DEI. So, a couple of Facebook friends that I have posted this morning outrage about the desecration of the Arlington National Cemetery. And all of the responses underneath that sensationalized post was, of course, reactionary to the original post, but no one bothered to look it up. So that's what I did. I looked it up. And this information is uh, taken from USA Today. Oh, the title is Arlington National Cemetery Desecrated, Disappearing DEI or History. Uh, Information taken off Arlington National Cemetery site. That's a very long headline from USA Today by Eduardo Cuevas and Dinah Voiles Pulver. So I'm just going to read some selections from it very quickly, just to give you an overview. So here is the article. A visitor to Arlington National Cemetery's website earlier this year would have seen links to information about a wide range of notable African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and women buried there. Period. And I just want to emphasize they always leave out Asians. Okay, they always do. It's kind of crazy. Now back to the article. Not anymore. The Trump administration unpublished, altered, or hid content and links about all three groups buried at the cemetery, one of the nation's most hallowed military sites. Other pages also vanished from the website, but are still accessible through Google searches. In response to questions from USA Today, the cemetery stated some of the removed content is being restored while still complying with the orders from President Donald Trump and the Defense Department. It did not specify which pages will be restored. The story of Arlington is essentially a story of diversity, equity, and inclusion, Levin said. That is the very thing that the Trump administration is trying to wipe clean, and that entails erasing our history. On January 29th, the DoD distributed a memo stating diversity, equity, and inclusion policies are incompatible with the department's values. Hegseth also created a task force to oversee the standing down of the diversity and inclusion offices throughout the department and military services, and the end of all actions by the offices that promote ideologies related to systemic racism or gender fluidity. The DoD mission is to win the nation's wars, Hegseth said. To do this, we must have a lethal fighting force that rewards individual initiative, excellence, and hard work based on merit. Changes also have occurred to other DoD websites, including military branches and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, to eradicate mentions of Black History Month and Pride Month, which celebrates gay, lesbian, bisexual, queer, and transgender individuals. In some cases, the keyword searches being used to flag content pull up subjects that had entirely different meanings. The Associated Press reported, for example, that photos were flagged on the Enola Gay, the B-29 bomber that dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The news shocked the granddaughter of the pilot, Paul W. Tibbets Jr., whose mother the plane was named for, the Columbus Dispatch reported. And that's what I'm going to read from the article. I think that captures enough of what was going on that we can talk about it. So, this is part of the DEI purge that Trump had promised and is now being carried out. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is basically this neo Marxist driven race theory, and it's being eradicated. And when they do that, when they try to erase everything that has to do with this kind of regressive ideology, there's going to be collateral damage. However, it was stated even by USA Today that some of the sites, some of the links will be brought back. And I think perhaps top on the list that should be brought back are the segregated units, right? They should be brought back because the segregation was by the government, right? It wasn't voluntary. It wasn't for some, uh, spy purposes. So the 100th and the 442nd Regimental Combat Teams were Japanese American soldiers. But that team was not put together so that they can pretend to be Japanese soldiers and go behind enemy lines and do commando raids. No, it was because Japanese men who were in the internment camps here in the United States, right? They were imprisoned, so-called concentration camps, because they were Japanese and people and Americans thought that they would turn into spies and start blowing up stuff in America for the Japanese, right? Because you can't trust these slants, right? So they gave them the opportunity to join, which they did. And they became the most decorated units based on size and length of service. All the black units in the Civil War and all the other wars, the Tuskegee Airmen, the Red Tails, I mean, there were many segregated units, right? And they usually, at least the ones that are, lauded and talked about and movies are made about them, they overperform, right? They perform better than the average military unit of their time. And so those I would think have the best case to have links and web pages on these government you know websites, right? Because it's because of the government that they were segregated. Otherwise, I don't think people would say, "Oh, these are all the Japanese soldiers who, are currently now serving in the US military, right? And just, because they're splattered all over the place, right? They're worked into other units. And so it's not, you're right, it's not something that is discussed. I mean, you can say that there are Asian soldiers now in the military or there are black soldiers all over the military, but you don't, you know, point them out only because of their skin color. Now, the question really should be, should these links and web pages and, celebrations, should they have been there in the first place? So, no, and these units shouldn't have been segregated in the first place either. But again, remember, we're coming out of racism. So, in prior years, right, they wouldn't even have been allowed to fight. They wouldn't have been allowed to fly planes, etc. So those things aside, those segregated units aside, uh, basically what we should be looking at on these government websites is a general honor for everyone, a general recognition for all who have sacrificed, made the greatest sacrifice for their king and country. Mention and honor for those people who won medals or awards. You can list all of that. But why reintroduce segregation, even if it's in death, right? In other words, why segregate all of the African American soldiers or the Hispanic soldiers or the female soldiers now that they're dead? They weren't segregated in life, aside from the segregated units that we talked about. Just want to make sure no one misunderstands. But in a lot of the units today, they're all incorporated, right? They're mixed in. So now we're going to resegregate them once they're dead. I mean, that's kind of weird. Interestingly, it's maintaining the perpetuation of racial signification, right? Uh, in other words, by maintaining like African American heritage thing, you are perpetuating racial signification. In other words, did their skin color or their race have anything to do with what they did, right? Oh, it's because they're Asian, that's why they won all those medals, right? Oh, it's because they're black that they flew those airplanes, right? Did the race have anything to do with it? And one could make the argument, no. Now, sometimes, especially in the all monoracial units, right, the all Japanese unit or the all black units, it's because of racial bigotry that a lot of the members of those units have a desire to prove something. But if you want to say, yes, their race does have something to do with their performance and their success, then what you're basically saying is, yes, race matters, right? So, in other words, you're taking the racist argument, the negative racist, right? The stereotype, like, oh, they're good for nothing person's point of view. When you say, yes, race had something to do with it, right? So are you going to make the argument, is your next argument to bring back segregated units? That would be interesting. Uh, so you're segregating them in death, so why not segregate them while they're still alive? The fact is, the reality, the harsh reality that a lot of people are not accustomed to think is that these heroes, and we'll use that word, heroes, share in the racial characteristic of bravery, self-sacrifice, or they were there at the right place at the right time, right? They were cowards, but we'll never know because they're dead, right? You don't know. Most people do not know unless there were other people to witness that every single one of them was brave, smart, courageous, a model to all of the little kids out there, right? Whatever they did in their free time, whatever they might have done before, nope, they're just a hero, be just like them, right? It's a caricature, right? It's a twisted distortion of reality. These are people, just like every other person, right? And from a diversity, from all over the country, you had people who shared in the racial characteristic of bravery, or perhaps the ability to fly an airplane really, really well, or the ability to shoot and kill people really, really well, right? And so that's what we're really talking about, right? Having the physicality, having the mentality, the psychological profile that is required to be able to take other people's lives, right? I mean, that if you look at it that way, then it doesn't matter what the color of the skin is. And especially we have to keep in mind this is the military where your training, basic training, or this indoctrination process is supposed to erase distinction. You're not an individual. You're not, John Smith, right? No, you are part of a unit and you function as a unit, right? And so it can't be, right, distinction because all of you have to learn how to be, uh, obey orders, right? Function as a unit, not like, oh, because of our color, we can't do things the same way, culture. No, that's not how, at least my understanding of it anyway. Um, and it's funny that a lot of people and civilians will bring it back for their own political agenda, right? Now, I'm not saying that actual soldiers don't look at themselves and forget what their ethnicity is. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the military is unconcerned about that. The military is more concerned about your ability to function as a unit, as a killing machine. So you can be proud, right? If you're the family of someone in the military, you can be proud of that person who puts on the same exact uniform as everyone else, right? I mean, that's uniformity is what is emphasized in a lot of this training, not individuality, not being a maverick. Yes, that's a Top Gun reference, right? So it's about functioning together as a unit, right? I will concede that highlighting racial differences defeats the notion that certain races cannot perform certain functions, right? Oh, they'll never be able to fly a plane. Oh, they'll never be able to shoot straight, right? So, yeah, but it happens naturally anyway, right? Uh, and as you go even further, then you have an all black unit. Does that mean that all African Americans, all blacks will be able to fight at the same level? Really? Are you going to make that argument? In other words, sometimes when there's a mass shooting, when I hear the story, and my wife told me she's the same, we both hope that it's not Asian, that the shooter is not an Asian, because if it is, then people might think that all Asians are shooters on the verge of just losing it and becoming a shooter, and that's the thing. It's not that, being Asian and being a shooter has nothing to do with each other, right? But people make that association in the same way that I'm talking about now with race and being able to fight in a war. Uh, so, do we highlight the fact that there are, in fact, a few Asians who are mass shooters? Or can we call it an exception? Or can we say this is the race of mass shooters? What do they all have in common? Right? Because it would transcend the color of their skin. It would have to be something else. We should also keep in mind, just to bring a close to the argument, to this discussion, whenever something is done with tax dollars on quote unquote government property, public land, there's always a risk of something like this happening. Now, remember when Civil War statues, flags of the South, supposed racist figures of history, their statues were vandalized, defaced, removed, including the founding fathers, like George Washington himself, right? That was a purge, right? People were like, oh, anyone associated with slavery, we got to purge it. The same people crying today about, websites, okay? There was no defacing of any tombstones. No one was dug up and then relocated. No, that did not happen, right? Websites were taken down and they're not erased completely, right? If like some of the things as I read, you can still find it, right? It's just the links are gone, right? Those same people are uh, silent when all of the like statues of the founding fathers were being defaced, right? No, they didn't say anything. So it's hypocrisy, right? If it was okay to take down these so-called Civil War monuments, then this is okay too, right? And people have to realize everything goes both ways unless you're going to engage in hypocrisy, right? And so if you still want all of those resources, the websites, the links, you can have them, right? People can put up a web page, even me with my meager, uh, you know, budget, stealing from the family, right? I have podcast sites and everything, we can do that. And I haven't worked on the web page, but uh, whatever, but someone could do that very easily if they didn't have like two or three jobs and four kids and stuff. They could probably do something like that, right? It's not that difficult, right? And if you're doing a research project on, I don't know, the Red Tails, right, which is the African American fighter escort squadron that escorted bombers over Germany and stuff, right? You can research it. There was probably books and articles up the wazoo about it, and you can put up your own website, right? And people who are affiliated with those groups, you can raise the money for that. So once again, graves are not being dug up. This is not desecration. Okay, it's an enforcement of uh, government and military policy, right? It's just that, the government and the military, the DoD, they won't be running these websites any longer, right? So in conclusion, the military is trying to focus, right? More importantly, what we have to keep in mind is that what is really going, the military is trying to refocus Remember that the focus is on killing. And so the real worry is, are they preparing for killing? Right? I mean, has this not occurred to anyone? Right? I mean, what's the focus? Do we need to focus on being a killing machine again? So we're going to enter war somewhere? Come on. Right? And so that's why I said another one bites the dust, right? So Trump is bit the dust. He's now pro-war as while he's still saying he's anti-war. It's just weird, you know. But if we are going to remind ourselves that this is really about killing, I think the better question that we should ask is there a way to avoid all of this killing? Is there a way to, not have a military as large as it is, so that the people who would have gone into the military will instead look for better jobs, more productive jobs, right? Jobs that, you know, more choices from which people can choose that are way better than learning how to take someone else's life, especially since we know now that there are a lot of political shenanigans behind the start of these wars. Lots of shadiness, a lot of backroom deals, false flags, straight up lying, right? Now that we know that this happens all the time, you know, should we really be focused on glorifying the taking of life? And I think that that doesn't seem to be the way to go. So those are my thoughts on the matter, right? That it's really not that much of a big deal. This is something that should have happened from the very beginning. And then private groups, organizations, if they wanted to have some kind of memorial that they would pay for, right? So it's all their property. On their property, no one can come and deface it or remove it because it's private property. But when it's on public land, government land, people who don't like it, they riot and they destroy things, right? And I don't think anyone would ever really want that. But of course, now that Trump is doing all of this stuff, his administration is doing that, which is really not destructive. Nothing is being destroyed. Websites are virtual after all. But you know that if the Republicans, or at least this administration, ever go out of power, like J.D. Vance is not elected as the next president, then for sure we know that the next Democrat to be president will reverse everything. We'll just bring everything back. And that just simply will not do. Okay. But that's it for this episode. I hope that it was interesting. In other words, I left it so you can believe whatever it is you want to believe, but to keep in mind, we're only having this debate because all of these things are on public, right? Public land or public websites. And so people are upset about it. You don't like it, just start your own and do an even better job. That's it for this episode. I'll talk to you guys next time.